if you didn't already know before the day started what it is we should be doing to put into Medicare for All, you've heard the excellent suggestions of our panelists all day long, which leaves the somewhat annoying little issue of how do we get there. But that's okay, we have one more panel.
Good luck, sweetheart.
So the panel, our final panel is called, in fact, Transition: How to Get from Here to There. And we have two speakers. One is Diane Archer, whose important academic credential I inadvertently admitted, JD, and founder and president of Just Care USA, and a long-term advocate for Medicare and for health care for the boomers. Am I allowed to say okay boomer at this point?
Okay, boomer.
And Laura Schmidt, who is organizational sociologist at the same place where I work, the Institute for Health Policy Studies at UCSF. Both will talk about key questions in how do we build support for and make the technical transition to Medicare for All. I think we're starting with Diane, is that right? Okay.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you, Jim. You've done a marvelous job of putting together a group of speakers who make loud and clear that our healthcare system is broken big time, and we so desperately need Medicare for All. Thank you all for hanging in. It's time for the fun stuff. Jim asked me, as you just heard, to talk about how we build structure and support for Medicare for All. And so here we go, beginning with a few key challenges. In the last two waves of health reform, the U.S. conducted two big experiments. Subsidized corporate health insurance for people under 65 through the Affordable Care Act, and Medicare Advantage, a private alternative to public Medicare. The ACA expanded health care coverage in the U.S., and Medicare Advantage offers retirees a seemingly lower-cost alternative to traditional Medicare. But taken as a whole, these two reforms have not led us to guaranteed affordable health care for all Americans, as we all know. Instead, national health care spending has grown significantly, as has the power of corporate health insurers. And tens of millions of Americans remain uninsured or underinsured. In the next wave of health reform, we need to expose the dangers of corporate health insurance and loosen its grip on our healthcare system. We need to ensure that steps on the road to Medicare for All build support for public health insurance. So, how do we build that structure and support? I want to focus on three big challenges we face. The desire among some policymakers to expand coverage through the ACA and offer a public option, the growth of Medicare Advantage, and the power and influence of the health care industry. We have some heavy lifting, but I promise to end on a high note. Okay. Challenge number one, the ACA. Our 10-year experiment with state-based publicly funded coverage has brought to the fore that even if you could cover everyone through the ACA relies on corporate health insurers, which have not been able to deliver good, affordable care. Cost is prohibitive, coverage unreliable, and outcomes uneven, depending upon the state administering the exchange. Politics can get in the way of the state system working. On top of that, the ACA underscores the limited ability of most states to oversee corporate insurers. It might be all states, we don't know yet. They tend to lack the resources to provide active oversight, even when they have the political will. As one example, Kaiser reports average claim denial rates in the state health exchanges of 19% and as high as 45%. Something seems really off. There's no reason to believe the ACA can be improved upon to deliver Americans good, affordable care. As I'm about to explain in the context of Medicare Advantage, adding more subsidies to help people afford coverage and a public option to, quote, compete with the corporate insurers doesn't build a bridge to the healthcare system we need. It builds more power for corporate health insurers. Still, fear of change, corporate lobbying, and a desire to move incrementally leads many Democratic leaders to propose building on the ACA. Challenge number 2, the growth of Medicare Advantage. We need to expose the failings of Medicare Advantage because it's undermining support for public Medicare. It's a big roadblock to getting to Medicare for all. The presumptive rationale for Medicare Advantage plans is that they're smarter and better at meeting people's needs and controlling costs than traditional Medicare. But the evidence tells a very different story. Medicare Advantage plans meet people's needs so long as they're relatively healthy. People with costly conditions needing affordable, high-value care are at health and financial risk. Unlike traditional Medicare, as David Himmelstein explained, Medicare Advantage plans need to avoid delivering high-cost care. The less care they deliver, the more profits they make. Put differently, if they attract too many people with costly and complex conditions, their revenues fall. That's why you never see an ad from them saying, "We want you if you have cancer. We offer the best cancer care." And you never will. To minimize costs and maximize revenues, Medicare Advantage plans market to the healthy, establish skinny networks, offer often poor quality, set complex coverage rules, impose high out-of-pocket costs, and inappropriately delay and deny care. They don't disclose claims data, information on average out-of-pocket costs, denial rates, and more. What are they hiding? A series of reports out of Brown University find that people enrolled in Medicare Advantage plans who need nursing home care, and hospital care tend to see lower quality providers than people in traditional Medicare. And many people leave these plans when they need costly care, shifting higher costs onto traditional Medicare. At a bare minimum, we should require Medicare Advantage plans to disclose plan-level data in order to help us to better understand differences among them and whether they're meeting the health care needs of their members. We know more about restaurants and automobiles than we do about Medicare Advantage plans. With Medicare Advantage, we see how offering people the choice between public insurance and corporate health insurance, this is a public option that some folks are calling for, weakens the public option. Medicare Advantage plans invest in marketing their products and wielding their political power in order to steer more healthy people to sign up with them. And they've succeeded big time. The Medicare playing field is tilted in favor of corporate health insurers. It didn't start out that way. At the beginning, they were losing ground. Traditional Medicare has no out-of-pocket cap, so people who join are not protected against financial risk unless they have extra coverage. But now, Medicare Advantage has an out-of-pocket limit and can offer extra benefits, like dental care. So for many retirees on a small budget, Medicare Advantage seems like a less costly alternative. And it is, as long as you don't get sick. In addition, large employers and unions often steer retirees into Medicare Advantage plans. It's a way for them to save money on retiree benefits, who knows at what cost to their retirees. Not surprisingly, enrollment in Medicare Advantage plans is growing at a rapid rate. It could easily crowd out traditional Medicare in the next several years. Today, more than a third of the Medicare population is enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan. We don't have nearly the data we need, but we have a trove of government audits and independent analyses revealing that Medicare Advantage plans are violating their contractual obligations. By the federal government's own account, some are, quote, threatening the health and safety of their members. Audits have found, quote, widespread and persistent performance problems related to denials of care and payment. Medicare Advantage plans have overcharged Medicare and taxpayers to the tune of tens of billions of dollars over the last decade, and the government hasn't gotten a penny back. They've not released reliable or complete encounter data as required by law, preventing the government from ensuring plans are delivering appropriate levels of care or billing the government appropriately. Inexplicably, we don't know which or how many plans are non-compliant. They should be named publicly and their contracts terminated for serious violations, for the health of the people with Medicare and the fiscal integrity of Medicare. What's particularly troubling is that Congress and CMS have been unwilling or unable to hold Medicare Advantage plans to account for persistent grave violations. This past fall, Senator Sherrod Brown drafted a letter to CMS asking what CMS is doing to address these Medicare Advantage violations. Only 5 other senators were willing to co-sign the letter. Debbie Stabenow, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, David Blumenthal, and Richard Blumenthal, and Chris Murphy. To date, CMS has not responded. In sum, what we know about Medicare Advantage is that there's a lot that's not working, and there's a lot we don't know. Yet hundreds of members of Congress, Democrats included, support it. Challenge number 3, the power of the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry, including health insurers, pharma, and some providers, the big for-profit hospitals for sure, is conducting a full court press against Medicare for All, the public option, and public insurance more generally. We know the story. Medicare for All decried as socialized medicine, a threat to the Treasury, a huge tax increase. We need to be engaged in an ongoing campaign to discredit the health insurance industry. We need to demonstrate over and over and over again that corporate health insurers can't guarantee the affordable, high-value care we need. And Medicare for All should be seen as an improvement and expansion of traditional Medicare. Americans should value it as we do Medicare and Social Security. Support for Medicare for All is strong. With education and time, it will be stronger. But people's fear of loss and fear of change must be overcome. To move forward, we need to build alliances among grassroots organizations, doctors, hospital, businesses, organized labor, and policymakers. So if you guys haven't gone to speak to your local congressman about Medicare for All, call up, make an appointment. We need to be seen. The corporations are in their offices every day, and we're not being seen and heard as much as we need to be. Moving forward, it will be a heavy lift, as we all know, to win Medicare for All, even with Democratic majorities in Congress. Campaign finance reform, as was mentioned earlier in the day, would help, and we should regulate drug prices. In the interim, Medicare Advantage plans that are overcharging Medicare or putting the health of their members at risk should be shut down, and we should demand disclosure of plan-level Medicare Advantage data. We should also advocate for a single electronic records and claims payment system for all patient care so we can better see what's working in our healthcare system and where the problems lie. So what's next? I would suggest that we need a strategic plan laying out short and medium-term goals and tactics developed by as broad-based a coalition as possible. What are Medicare for All's essential features? How do we best strengthen traditional Medicare? How do we most effectively keep Congress from further empowering corporate health insurers? Would an incremental solution such as guaranteeing Medicare for All to everyone from birth to age 18 or 50 plus be helpful? Is there any way a Medicare buy-in could work? We have some big challenges, but we also have the moral high ground. Great Medicare for All bills in the House and the Senate, along with logic, reason, and a solid majority of Americans on our side. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
10 more minutes. And I'll make it fast. So early on in my career, I spent years digging around in government archives and in health industry trade publications. I was really interested in trying to understand where did this crazy thing called the world's first competitive healthcare market in America come from? And why did this happen? It was, this was back in the Clinton health reform era, and that was the question that was driving my research. Along the way, of course, I had to understand, well, why didn't other more viable options succeed? Like single-payer healthcare, or the idea of organizing the health industry like a public utility, which was a very popular idea in health policy circles in the 1970s and also in Congress. So, and so I'm going to speak from that place, from having studied this, and I'm going to speak to I only have 10 minutes. I wrote 400 pages on this topic, but I'm going to just give you a little feeling for what I think is a message. If I could send it to the single-payer community, it's the message I would send. And as Diane said, it's a pretty heavy political lift here. The people are risk-averse, and change is scary on the one hand. Even when people get slapped with, surprise medical bills, it may not have happened to me, just someone I know. And then on the other side, we have this hyper-partisanship in our federal politics where conservatives really are dominating the airwaves. And I think we can all agree on that. And it's challenging. And so how do we navigate this particular political moment on behalf of single-payer healthcare? How do we build a robust coalition of political actors and public support for whatever kind of transition is needed here, whether it's an abrupt transition, 6 months, or it's a very slow incremental thing that starts with states lowering the age limits on Medicare eligibility and so forth. However it goes, we need that broad political support and a coalition that can stand up to some pretty scary rhetoric coming from the other side. So how do we do this? So going back to 1965, the architects of Medicare had a very clear agenda, and their agenda was Medicare for all. It was called the stepping stone idea, and their thought was, we get Medicare, and in 5 years, we can make a play for national health insurance. That was as soon as people get a taste of this program and understand it, and people will want more. So circa 1970, there was a raging debate around Medicare for all in our federal politics. And the usual players lined up. You had labor on one side and grassroots activists and so forth. And then on the other side, you had the American Medical Association, the American Hospital Association, the private insurers, of course, and Big Pharma, right? Pretty familiar political divisions, same as today. And at the time, what was really interesting to me is that all the experts said, we're going to get national health insurance out of this, Medicare for all. In 1970, you could find people like the folks that have been on this stage today saying this in writing, in all the health policy journals. And within a few years, that idea was totally off the table, and we were already in the midst of building the competitive healthcare market that we're now stuck with today. I won't explain how that all happened, but I will say that things are, history has a lot of lessons. This political history of healthcare in America has a lot of lessons for us today. And the lesson I want to talk about today, which I think from my studies is one of the most important, has to do with values, cultural frames, ideas, not with money, but with ideas and systems of meaning that are adopted in the political culture and live on. So this comes out, during the 20th century, there were 6 major debates over health reform. This comes out of the one in the Truman era. This is a pamphlet that was distributed by the American Medical Association. As you see, the 19th century doctor, where the AMA came from, this sort of tending this poor child. And the slogan is, keep politics out of this picture. If you flip this over, it would have said, The voluntary way is the American way. Keep politics out of this picture. When life or health of loved ones is at stake, hope lies in the devoted service of your doctor, not your government, your doctor. Compulsory health insurance, AKA government Medicare for all, is a political machine, right? So this is echoing, the Red Scare and socialism and so forth. It would bring a third party, a politician, between you and your doctor. It would bind up your family's health, your little child, in red tape. Don't let it happen here, not in America. We're not going to let that happen. So moving on, this is again this is the sort of ground battle. I mean, the forces on the side of resisting compulsory health insurance were powerful. They were well-moneyed. But what's interesting, and what has always been interesting to me, is that while the AMA had the biggest, best-funded political action committee in Washington at the time, Labor had the second one, and they had almost equivalent resources, and they were fighting hard for Medicare for all. So it can't all come down to money, and this is why I think framing and ideas and values matter a lot. Here's our beloved Ronald Reagan, who speaks out. This was the AMA wives would host this is a real ground game, right? They'd host like a family, or they have their friends over and they'd play this record with Ronald Reagan. So now I'm going to forward, we had two more major health reform debates in the 20th century, bleeding into the 2000s. And I'm going to show you some images from the Clinton era health reforms, and I want you to appreciate how similar the frames and values and ideas are. So here's a bumper sticker. National health care, how dare we? The compassion of the IRS, you hate your government. The efficiency of the post office, all at Pentagon prices. So I've spent a lot of time trying to distill down, okay, what is in this frame that is so long-standing in American political culture? And I would say it has at least four parts to it. Number one, Medicare for all means unprecedented government interference in the most intimate affairs of your family, right? That picture of the doctor, don't let it happen here. Number two, Medicare for all means constraints on personal choice. God forbid in America that somebody tells us we can't do something that we want to do. Your doctor would do the best for you. Trust your doctor. Don't let the government get in the middle. It'll become compulsory, not voluntary. Number three, this key political metaphor, which we don't use anymore today, but I think the idea lingers. Compulsory versus voluntary. Americans are about personal choice. Government socialism, God forbid, is about compulsory. You're being compelled to do something you don't want to do. And number four, socialism is really, really scary, and it's un-American. So before I get to my sort of how-to slide, which is, I want to tell you a little bit about this epiphany that I had, not at the time, but later. I was in my 20s, and I grew up in San Diego with what in the 80s were considered Reagan Republicans for parents. It's probably partly why I have the politics I do today. And I remember this fight as I was starting to get interested in public health and healthcare that I had with my father, who was a diehard Republican. My parents were evangelicals. I mean, really like what's we've got today in our federal politics. And I remember having this crazy conversation. I hope you didn't have one at Thanksgiving with your family members, where I was trying to explain to him that Medicare, the Medicare that he was on, was not paid up insurance. It was different from private insurance. It was actually socialism. And not only that, but the VA is socialism, Social Security is socialism. And I was so frustrated, it's like, but it's the fact, right? You saw all those, yeah, it came through on your pay stub all those years, but that doesn't mean you were like banking money. Like it was crazy. And thinking back on that conversation, I have one thing that I really think is the epiphany for me, and that is that it was shameful to my dad. It was against his values to agree with me on the facts. He didn't want to agree because it was shameful for him to take a government handout. So that tells you a lot about the power of frames. My dad, my own father, very smart man, could completely defy the facts because they weren't in line with his values. And I actually knew more. I was in grad school and I was studying healthcare. I want to share with you one more image from the Clinton debates that I think really drives home my father's fear. Now, I think a lot of people in this room would say, Hillary Clinton, excuse me, socialized medicine? I don't think so, right? But here we go. So what about this history, and how could we strategically deploy this long-lasting set of cultural assumptions in our political culture coming out of a conservative frame? And I have to tell you, I did not see images like this, and especially not powerful, heart-rending images like this on the other side. What you see on the other side are facts, truthful facts, evidence, plans, great policy proposals, and lots of them. But what you don't see is values and frames quite the way that you see them on the conservative side. And that's what I think is really important here. So I'm going to offer 3 suggestions here. I mean, I could talk for a long time about this, but in order to build a political consensus around Medicare for all, 3 things that I think we need to do. And the first thing is to learn from the Conservative Party. It turns out, if you look at the history of modern conservatism, that in the 1950s, American conservatives were feeling completely, they were really divided politically, they were flailing, they didn't have a there. So what happened is conservative donors started fueling these think tanks. The American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, the Heritage Foundation, which now elects our Supreme Court nominees and elected officials. And these think tanks were funded not only to come up with wonky policy proposals, but more importantly, to come up with cultural frames, ideas, things that would resonate with the American public and would be powerful and enduring. Images, ideas, slogans in particular, what George Lakoff calls political metaphors. Very important. And over time, these think tanks started to script their talking points, and then in the Republican Party's Monday morning breakfast, people in federal politics would be held to the party line. So you had to stick to the script. And this happened over decades. They built this machine. And the idea was to push out ideas and then to take control of the media so that they could push out and saturate the public with these frames, with these ideas, with these political assumptions, and some of them pertain to healthcare. So I think what we need to understand is, and the message we need to take from the conservative project is that these frames, we have frames too. And we have values, and they're important, and we should be using those values. We maybe don't need to talk so much about the policies and the facts and the numbers and the truths, that scientific truths, which are very important for progressives. We can talk about values. We have our own. Now, George Lakoff, in his book Moral Politics, talks about, and he's not the first social scientist to talk this way, that a lot of the way that we perceive government is actually forged in our childhood through images of a family. And what he argues is that conservatives in our polarized politics today in America come out of a sort of strict father vision of the family, and progressives come out with a sort of nurturing parent-mother definition or frame. And these are really deep-seated. He believes these are cognitive structures in our brains. They go very deep into our bodies and our minds. And so, and it makes a lot of sense when you look at the words and the language that get used on the conservative and the progressive sides. So if you hear conservatives talk about taxes, for example, they'll talk about tax relief, code for tax cuts. We could do a lot better at talking about taxes as investments from a nurturing family perspective. Paying your dues to America. We all live here. We all use the public library and the fire department. They're dues for being a member of this community and this society. We could talk about taxes for the children. My parents paid taxes on behalf of us, me. These were investments, right? So there's a very subtle language shift, but you can see how the power of framing things and of the way that we talk about these matters. On the progressive side, you know, we really value scientific truth. I think we value equal chances for everyone, regardless of where we value inclusion, we value equity. And we could do a lot better to come up with slogans and things to package all of the great stuff we've heard today into value statements. And then finally, and this goes to Diane's point about a strategic plan, I think we need to yet again take a message from the conservative side of things and start thinking strategically about long-term strategies, not short-term, that cross-cut issue areas. So if you look at modern conservatism, what you'll see is that they're really good at pursuing carefully chosen strategic initiatives that once you pass the law, it affects not just one little domain like healthcare, but a lot of different domains. So this tort reform and tax cuts is a good example. Once you pass a big tax cut like we just had, you're going to be automatically affecting all these aspects of public policy. You're going to be starving social programs. You're going to be starving people who in the EPA who monitor polluters and so forth. So you get a lot of what you want from these cross-cutting, rather than to drill down into the issue politics the way we often do in the progressive side of things, because we're very scientifically oriented and we want the truth. We could think more strategically about cross-cutting initiatives. I think some of the most exciting things going on the progressive side may be just these kinds of ideas. Massive tax reforms, Green New Deal potentially. I mean, these are ideas that cross-cut. You can put a lot of different ideas into them. And then finally, I think it's important to map out what are kind of slippery slope initiatives. Medicare actually was a progressive slippery slope. We start with Medicare for the 65 and up, and then we move to national health insurance. We have to monitor the other side of that, and Medicare Advantage is a really good example. It's effectively the privatization of Medicare, and we need to monitor these slippery slopes and target our energies at them. So I'm out of time, and I just want to say progressive values we can frame. I think the conservative side has a jump start on us. They've been at this for many, many decades, but we really could learn a lot from their strategy. Thank you. I think it might be, maybe we should see what the questions are and see if they're.
All right, our last set of questions. Does someone have a microphone and a question? I see over here.
I just want to add that George Lakoff had a really good analysis of Obamacare, and he called it the American Patriotic Health Act. We need to make healthcare a positive asset in the community and make that our politics.
Exactly. Great point.
I heard from behind. Great point.
Great
I don't know
point.
if your microphones are on. All right. Question.
Yeah, quick question. David Rempel, UC San Francisco, medicine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What are Bernie and Elizabeth doing wrong in their framing of Medicare for all?
You go ahead.
I don't think it's on.
I don't think I can answer that question. I just don't have the kind of depth of knowledge about the details of the plans. I feel like that's a question for someone earlier in the.
I think the question, if I
Although-
understood it right, was also about the framing.
Right,
Was there
right,
something
right.
you-
And maybe they're spending too much time, especially Elizabeth, on the details, right? Getting way too caught up in the details.
Yeah, I mean, you start to
It's a-
see this critique, oh, she's got a plan for everything, right? That's kind of code, right? And, the thing about these polarized constituencies is that they really function as their own internal systems of meaning. And so it's not like the system of meaning on the conservative side is bad or wrong. Within that system of values, it's internally coherent, it makes a lot of sense. And the same is true on the progressive side. What's key is to learn what is the other side hearing and thinking, what is their value system, and how to navigate that. And I think that's really key. And I do think that when we come across as having a plan for everything, it may just kind of go over the head, as opposed to speaking from values that unify everyone, and everyone can like, who doesn't care about children, right? We all care about what's going to happen to our children. And so talking about it that way, investments, I think is a really important way that we can frame progressive values.
I want to offer a comment as well. I think that Bernie has, and I think Elizabeth Warren as well, has certainly offered fairness as a value, and I think that's absolutely appropriate. I don't think I've heard much about compassion. And I think that ultimately what this is about in Medicare for All, and much of what the left is proposing, is about compassion. And we saw that in the long-term care discussion as well. That would be my vote.
Hi. Connected to your last presentation, I feel very compelled to tell this very august group about Michael Moore's podcast that he just came out with Anand Giridharadas. Anand, who's written a book about, you probably have heard it, he had the best, I think, summary of how we
Sorry,
should...
just a technical thing. Can you hold the microphone
Oh, yes, of course. I'm
consistently
sorry.
in one place?
Thank you.
I know
I'm
you're
right up
excited.
here.
This is a good comment coming. We can tell.
No, this is something. I've been working at this communications issue for 15 years, and Anand did it in 5 minutes and solved it for me, I think. Instead of talking about healthcare for all, we need to put it more in patriotic terms. Frame it in personal transformation. Do something good for yourself. Do something good for other people. Paint pictures of the soldier he talked about at Normandy, pulling the other soldiers out of the water up to the beach. It's what Americans do, and that's what we should be doing. But he finishes with this, and by the way, this entire podcast with Michael that just came out a couple weeks ago, it's really good. He talks about, we should not talk about healthcare for all, we should talk about freedom from illness. Freedom from illness, freedom from healthcare freedom. I think it's a good message and a good start for us communicating.
And I think we really have to stop being surprised when people don't vote in their own economic interests. People vote on identities and values, and we got to just get over it.
Got the one guy that he's up.
Other questions?
Hello. Hey. Hi, my name's Eric. I am one of the community or grassroots organizers that you give a shout out to. Thank you for that. I'm glad we are finally talking about Bernie, because that seems like the solution that this entire colloquium is posing. How do we get to Medicare for all? We get to Medicare for all by organizing for and electing Bernie Sanders.
I want to just note that we are not here today picking particular candidates, and some would argue that there's another candidate who's interested in a similar goal. So I just want to make that. I'll suggest it as a corrective. Many will support Bernie, and others may not right now. Go ahead.
So I'm not speaking for the campaign. I don't suppose that everyone is on this page, but to like, how do we accomplish this? Bernie wrote the damn bill. Bernie has been fighting for this since before I was born. Bernie addresses this in terms of compassion, okay? And he doesn't regress, and he doesn't start to qualify it as a framework, right? He's been gung-ho for it. So throughout the day, only Dr. Sachs is like giving Bernie the shout out, and like it seems like this elephant in the room that like that's how we get there. And my point was not just like Bernie is great, but like if we want Medicare for all and we organize for and elect Bernie's not just going to snap his fingers and we have Medicare for all, okay? It's going to take a grassroots movement of working class people to hold the government to account and implement this, okay? We could talk policy all day long. It's going to take a movement of people to accomplish it, just like earlier in the day, I forget the speaker, but everything that's ever been accomplished for the good in this country has come through a working class movement. So I just want to like acknowledge there is a way for that. His name is Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. We have time, if there is one question for the panelists, one last question. Who would like the last question of the day?
Yeah, I think this university probably has some of the best marketing and business people in the world teaching these courses, and I think you need to mate the facts and figures that we've got today, and like came out on the Poland report when California last tried to get a single payer. These two gentlemen, Friedman and Poland, came out with a report and would save $38 billion a year for California. And instead of putting that last in the report, I'd put it first in the report and then say it again last in the report, because people want to know what it's going to benefit me, you know, and start with the benefits. But you have in the university here a wonderful marketing, you know, and business group that you need to employ to get this, to show people how it will benefit them.
Do you want to make any last comments? All right, well, we,
Jim,
in theory, have a reception waiting for us where lunch was, and so thank you all.